We start this evening in Syria, where the military is building up forces in preparation to liberate Idlib province. It's drawing the attention of the White House and those who say this could lead to the end of the country's 7-year war. RT's Dan Cohen brings us the latest.
The battle lines have been drawn. It's the final hurdle for the Syrian government to regain control of the entire country. Troops are stationed along Idlib's border. They're backed by Russian forces and set to begin operations. Inside Idlib, militants from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, once known as the al-Nusra Front or al-Qaeda, have dug their heels in, and their leader has declared anyone who surrenders is a traitor.
Our weapons are the source of our strength and honor. Thinking about surrendering to the enemy and handing over weapons will be considered treason.
Opposition media outlets claim Russia has already begun launching airstrikes on Idlib. However, there's been no official confirmation. On Monday night, U.S. President Donald Trump warned Russia and Iran against attacking Idlib in a tweet.
President Bashar al-Assad of Syria must not recklessly attack Idlib province. The Russians and Iranians would be making a grave humanitarian mistake to take part in this potential human tragedy. Hundreds of thousands of people could be killed. Don't let that happen.
The White House went on to release a statement warning, quote, that if President Bashar al-Assad chooses to again use chemical weapons, the United States and its allies will respond swiftly and appropriately. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov insisted Russia works to minimize civilian casualties.
We are now doing all we can, along with our Turkish and Iranian colleagues and the Syrian government, to separate the armed opposition from the terrorists in the area, to ensure that civilian lives are spared in any military operation.
For President Trump, it's a marked shift in rhetoric. In April, he referred to Syria's president as Animal Assad. Now he calls him president. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley echoed Trump, writing on Twitter, "All eyes on the actions of Assad, Russia, and Iran in Idlib. Hashtag no chemical weapons." This comes months after the U.S. bombed Syrian government installations on the basis of a chemical weapons attack, which it later admitted it had no evidence even occurred. With the end of the 7-year conflict in sight and the Syrian and Russian militaries dominant on all fronts, it's hard to see why Assad would resort to chemical weapons and essentially invite another U.S. attack. Reporting in Washington, Dan Cohen, RT.
For more on all of this, we turn to former Pentagon official Michael Maloof. Michael, U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday warned Syrian President Bashar al-Assad by tweeting out the Russians and Iranians would be making a grave humanitarian mistake to take part in this potential human tragedy. Hundreds of thousands of people could be killed. Don't let that happen. Michael, as I've asked so many times since President Trump went into office, what do you make of President Trump's tweet and what is missing from it?
Well, there's a lot of consideration going into this. This is the last part of a major offensive for the Syrian government to take over the western portion. And I think what's of some concern is not only the potential humanitarian crisis that could occur, but I think it's also an effort by the United States to offset any advances by the Syrian government and the Russians to go and retake eastern Syria, east of the Euphrates, and I think that they're going to look for any provocation of any kind, real or imagined, to hold that Idlib encounter and not take any advance on it, and I think that. The United States does not want to give up the East, and that's the problem. The other problem too is that you have Al-Qaeda and other jihadi Salafists in that area. Now, Russia and Syria are very concerned and aware of the humanitarian potential crisis. There are ways to go about that. Maybe open up corridors and highways, strategic highways, to allow the government in to minimize that kind of problem. But so far, any bombing has been in the peripheral areas.
Well, it's interesting. You did bring up, when you started, a couple of the different groups that are in the area. Yes. Who exactly is President Assad taking control of Idlib from, and why at this stage?
Well, there are an estimated 10 to 30,000 Al-Qaeda in that Idlib area, and it's almost impossible to distinguish who the bad guys are. And even Turkey now has basically said that al-Qaeda will be a target, and they have forces that are moving in. That's another problem too, because if there's any fighting, you have Turkish forces which are going to be in the fray. So this is what makes this Idlib undertaking so complex and difficult, notwithstanding the fact that it's the last bastion, if you would, in the West. But there are political considerations. You've got Russia, Iran, and Turkey meeting over the weekend to discuss this and to try and hammer out a way to try and minimize a humanitarian disaster.
Al-Qaeda, a group that is very familiar in negative ways with people here in the West. And so it's interesting to hear that they're also, that they're such a dominant place. You know, the White House also issued another warning today saying, let us be clear that it remains our firm stance that if President Bashar al-Assad chooses to again use chemical weapons, the United States and its allies will respond swiftly and appropriately. I have to ask, how can we be sure, how can the White House be so sure that it's Assad? The Russians have been warning for several weeks now that another attack was likely. Well,
they've been giving the warnings. They've passed intelligence, the Russians have, to the United States. And this is the problem. This is why the potential for a false flag is there. And what would drive the United States, real or imagined, to have an attack on the ground that would then prompt the United States to engage in a kinetic way.
Well, it's definitely a very interesting powder keg of an area that's going to continue.
Absolutely.
Can either escalate or can de-escalate. Thanks
correct.
for joining us,
Sure,
Michael.
Sure.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.